Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Ash.
Hi, y'all.
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back on this week's episode of Westworld and provide our thoughts and analysis after having 24 hours to digest the episode. This week's episode was episode 1 of season 4, titled The Auguries. Ash, now that you've had a day to think about it, possibly rewatch, any differences in the way you feel about this episode?
I still feel like it was very quiet. I still feel like it was very middle of the road, and that it still didn't feel like Westworld for the most part of it. But yeah, if I had to give it a wipe score, since we are Shat the movie/TV here, I think I'd give it a solid 2.5. You know, it's an average episode.
Yeah, I did ask on Twitter at Shat on TV account what people would give this episode. And at last I checked, it was 30% said 0 to 1 wipe, 48% said 2 to 3 wipes, and 22% said 4 to 5 wipes. Now, that might not sound that great, but that does mean that 78%, the overall majority, thought it was at least average or better. So that's a positive. And I think people are very much in a wait and see pattern. So last night during the Instacast, we talked about some of the topics we wanted to cover in the deep dive. We've already gotten about 5 or 6 emails in that are fantastic that will likely make it into our Telegraph later this week. Really, really great job. Again, if you guys want to write in, you can write in at hosts@shatontv.com. But today's deep dive, we're going to cover a couple things. One is the episode title, The Auguries, what it could mean and what it might reference. We're going to talk about changes in the opening credits that are pretty blatant, pretty obvious, but we should go through them, what they could mean as well. We're going to talk about what happened in the 7 years between season 3 and season 4, at least from what we can tell. We're going to cover what the Man in Black was up to in that opening scene. We're going to talk about Christina's world that we've seen in season 4 and some of the parallels that we've seen to previous episodes of Westworld, specifically with Dolores' life. And we're going to go over what Teddy is doing here, why he's there, what his intentions might be, plus any other odds and ends that catch our attention. So let's start with the episode title. So this one was titled The Auguries. If you recall from our preview, this is the one episode title that was left out of the early release of titles this season. We got a great letter in from longtime listener Gillian that we'll save for the Telegraph that goes over some of the following episode titles and what they might mean. But let's focus on this one. First things first, The Auguries. Now, the most obvious thing, if you go and you just Google The Auguries, you're going to get a horror novel by F.G. Cottam. It's a fairly recent horror novel, which is not something that Westworld typically does, referring to anything that's like 2018 or later. It does talk about a book that it should never have been written, falling into the hands of a loner girl in present-day London in this case, and citizens paying a horrible price. So possible there's a connection there, but I think it's more likely that they're looking back further in time because other literary references that we've had, like the My Father's Dragon book reference that Caleb is reading to his daughter, that goes back to like the 1940s. There is a William Blake poem, Auguries of Innocence, that discusses like signs of innocence as William Blake sees them.
Yeah, you know, and I was thinking about this today, and there's this great line here in this poem that, you know, like, tell me this isn't Westworld, right? A dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. A horse misused upon the road calls to heaven for human blood. Like, hello.
I'm going to scrap the rest of what I was going to say because I was like, it's probably not that either. I think it might be that actually, Ash. But getting to the core of what an augury is, as Ash mentioned, whatever we're going with here, whatever Westworld is trying to achieve, it is the practice of telling the future through omens. I think originally it was observing the flight of birds. But it is interesting that the predictive title, right, was the one that they left out, almost as a tease to us.
Well, and I think they always do that because I do think out of all the titles, this one was the easiest to link to literary references or worldly references, which we know that these showrunners love a good literature reference. And so I think that might have been why, because just like they told us Teddy and it kind of ruined some stuff, maybe if they had told us this and we had read the poem ahead of time, we'd be like, oh, you know. So I like it. A little bit of mystery.
So second to the episode title, we get to the opening credits. The first thing that we see most strikingly is the fly. And it's not like in the corner of the screen. It is dead center on the screen. And flies have been with us since Westworld season 1, when we discussed how they relate to death and decay. And more importantly, that moment, if everyone remembers back to season 1, when Dolores first swatted a fly, it was a gasp moment. It was our first hint that she was capable of hurting living things and therefore not bound to a standard host protocol. Not necessarily saying that she was sentient, but she wasn't playing by the rules we thought were established. But a fly has never been featured in the opening credits, where it now sits kind of as the star. And I noticed that not only is there a model of the fly kind of being assembled in front of us in these opening credits, but also in the final frames of the opening credits, we pan out from these cells that appear to contain hosts, and it reveals this form that sort of looks like a compound eye. And if you're not familiar with the compound eye, a fly, people like often say like the Cramp song, right? I got 96 tears and 96 eyes. They don't really have 96 eyes. It's more like a collection of lenses, right? And seeing through those, unlike us, where we have an aperture eye, where we get one clearly focused picture, they kind of get a low resolution idea of what's going on around them. But the trade-off, because they see the world differently from humans, is that their field of vision is massive. They can see all around them, and they can detect motion 7 times faster than our eyes, which almost feels like they can predict things before they happen.
Well, and it also has to do with the way that they see color. When you see through a compound eye, you see color in a completely different way that we do. So it's almost like you're seeing things that don't exist elsewhere. And what I find really interesting is the entire concept of insects in general, right? Where you've got the hive mind. It's the same idea, except it's within one organ, right? It's within one eye. And when you've got that in there, it's almost like these hosts, like, are we going to deal with a hive mind this season where there is something that is driving everything? And then let's not forget that we've got like host flies at the start of the episode with these nanobots or whatever they were. So I think they're pushing this one down our throat pretty hard, and this is going to definitively come back to us this season.
And this could be a distinct contrast to what we saw in season 3, which was a singular mind, right? Rehoboam or Solomon, right? A singular mind that was predictive, that was calling the shots. And instead, what if you did it as a collective? How would that be different in its ability to predict and its ability to control? Or even would it even want to? And speaking of those cells that we saw that kind of put together this compound eye form, that's another new feature of the opening credits. It seems to be hosts. They look like they're in cells, and what they're doing is pressing their hands against the walls of those cells while reaching out to one another, it looks like. And one of our listeners, Stan, he wrote in to say that the way he viewed it was people sitting in front of screens. Again, that idea of a hive mind connected by the stories that we write for each other. And after reading that, I noticed the parallel between these little cells and Christina's workstation. It's got that curvature. She's in it. She's looking through it. And that gets me really excited for what the season has to say about the human condition. And what would a Westworld season be without some headquarters to fear or attack, right? In season 1, we had the Mesa looming over the park. In season 2, it was the Forge. In season 3, it was Rehoboam. Now we seem to have the Tower. Don't know what it is. It looks like something out of the Avengers. I don't know what it does. And I don't know why every seemingly deranged person on the show asks about it. That remains to be seen. But I do feel like it's safe to say, no spoilers here, there will be a tower involved this season. And finally, we get to the Fleshy Hosts. I thought my eyes might have deceived me. I thought maybe it'd just been so long I had to dust off my Westworld credentials. But I went back and checked. These hosts in the season 4 credits are definitely more fleshed out. And I started thinking about why that could be. It could be that they're signaling a shift to more organic bodies. We learned that the Generation 1 hosts were pretty much mechanical. Then for cost savings, they made them fleshier. It could be that it's a strengthening of their hand. If you notice, the hands that are playing the piano are far more muscular. Or it could be even a blurring of the line between human and host, which would fit this season's theme of questioning what it means to be human. Also, another thing the hosts are doing, aside from looking a little more fleshy, a little softer, they're doing far more, dare I say, mundane and civilized things. If you think back to previous seasons, it's sex, it's horseback riding, it's shooting. They're not doing any of that anymore. It's far more normal human stuff.
So if you've got the people on the screens, one thing they have never really explored in the Westworld world is this idea of social media and the way that that connects all of us, and the fact that these screens, I mean, think about how a fly sees and the fractured view, like social media is nothing but a fractured view of one another. And then Lisa Joy also commenting on the trailer, because I would say most of the stuff that's being written right now is about the opening credits. I apologize, not the trailer, the opening credits. And she said to think about the song that they used in one of the teasers, that Lou Reed song, Perfect Day. And she specifically quoted the line, "You reap what you sow." And I think a lot of people are thinking like, oh, well, this must be like the world reaping what they've sown with Westworld. But I'm curious, thinking about what's happening with Christina, with Teddy coming back, is it going to be that the hosts begin to reap as well as the people as well? Because I think that would make this a lot more interesting, because we are the victims of our own perspective. And if flies are really inherent here, they have a completely fucked perspective on the world because of the way that they see. And that could be really fun this season to complicate that question even further of who's good, who's bad, who's white hat, who's black.
And before anybody says there was social media in season 3, note that in season 3, it was contracts.
Yeah.
It was watching a digital market that was controlled by a central entity or by agents, right? It wasn't social media as we think of it, which is people expressing themselves, expressing their stories and consuming that.
Yeah, which I think is a really important distinction, right? Because there's a big difference between something like Facebook Marketplace and Facebook itself, right? I mean, they serve two completely different purposes, and one is meant to provide an image while the other is meant to sustain, money. But as interesting as the opening credits were, because they really, really were, I think I watched them probably 5 or 6 times by themselves because they were absolutely beautiful. Just looked like a total work of art. The other big piece here is that we know we've had a time jump. And I know that time jumps have become something that a lot of shows do to not have to deal with necessarily like the fallout of their season finale. And there was going to be a war, clearly, that was taking place post season 3. And so we've kind of skipped over all of that. And so we wanted to just orient ourselves here and just kind of look at where our characters are 7 years post the end of season 3. So let's start with Maeve. Maeve is clearly living in a cabin somewhere. It's cold. It looks very much like the cabin that Dexter New Blood was shot in. And she's living it up because I don't know if you guys noticed, but she's got a copious amount of wine and wine glasses on the counter there. So she is still like saloony Maeve here, liking her drinks in the evening. She's off the grid. She's clearly trying to keep a low profile since the end of season 3. And one thing that I think is very interesting is she is digging through her memories in a really conscious way. And I think that's going to be inherently important to us because why? I don't think it's just to see her daughter and remember a happy memory. She's looking for something or potentially looking for someone or maybe even someplace. Like, is she seeking the valley beyond where her daughter is? I don't know, but there is something that's going on there that she's been spending all this time carving through her own memories to try to find.
And it's interesting that Maeve's goal in season 1 was to get out of the park and see what the real world was all about. She was very concerned with reality, right? Even to the point of abandoning her cornerstone, her daughter. But now that she's out, the focus is backward on her past. Like she seems to be looking for something, as you said, that will give her a signal as to what she needs to do or how she goes on. She's in stasis, really. And I know a lot of fans love Maeve's newfound superhero status and her general badassery. A lot of the reviews of this episode were giving high praise for her ass kicking. But I've got a hunch that Maeve's story will make the least sense out of everything that we've seen. And unfortunately, from what we've seen in past seasons, I feel like she's forever going to be consigned to sidekick status. And I'm hoping for better for her in this season. I hope that they flip this on its head and that thing that she's searching for might even be the entire impetus for this season.
Yeah, I hope so. And not even the sidekick thing that bothers me. She's become fan service, like her saying like, hello, darling, like, and all that kind of stuff. Like she's the one where we're all supposed to go, oh, whoa, those moments when she comes back. And it doesn't hit the same way as it normally does. But I have to admit, I did enjoy seeing her out of like slinky dresses and just like in like normal like women clothes. I thought that was pretty cool.
Her hair
Mm-hmm.
in the first scenes when she's out of the cabin, gorgeous.
She's beautiful. Yeah. Such a beautiful woman and such a great character. And another one that is fantastic is obviously Evan Rachel Wood. She is really the cornerstone of this show. Her performance, most of our seasons have hinged on her ability to really embody these different iterations of Dolores, or different personalities, let's say, of Dolores. And so we get her here as a character named Christina. And of course, one of the biggest differences is she's got black hair as opposed to her blonde hair. And we know that she is clearly in some version of New York City, right? One thing on rewatch that I just want to point out that I really, really enjoyed is that the showrunners are doing such a beautiful job, both last season and this season, with making the future look like the world we know. Like, New York City's got a bunch of metal skyscrapers and there's glass everywhere, but also with like what clearly is a future version because they've got the green space and it just looks updated from what we have now, but not something crazy like Minority Report where we're all flying in cars, right? I like that with what they're doing, like we feel home in the future. And that allows us to feel safe and just kind of grip onto the story rather than trying to like reorient ourselves to where we are. I think the most important part about that in this episode is the tension that they create with Christina. Just her walking through the streets of New York, her going into her office, the way she's breathing, all of that tells us that something is off. She feels really, really tense all the time and is afraid of something that she doesn't know what it is or where it is or why it is. And I know that we talk a lot about like the simulation, right? Like we're all living in the Matrix, but this is really well done on rewatch if this is a simulation, because it's this question of how do we know it's a simulation if it feels so real? And I love that idea. And I love that she knows something's off. And I do hope that we get to explore that a lot this season.
There are tiny call outs to that as well. Like when her roommate comments on the fact that she doesn't go anywhere. She's either in the apartment or at work. Just little hints here and there that could be nothing, but could also be that signal that you're in a simulation. And kudos to Westworld for masterfully executing on a really big ask, as you pointed out, Ash. They made it look like the future with tech advancements, but somehow not as sleek and refined as the world we saw in season 3. It's like they somehow said this is newer, but less futuristic at the same time. And being asked as a set designer, as an artist, to come up with what that looks like, that's a huge ask. And they absolutely nailed it.
They do. And then we get to Caleb, right? And so we don't find out a whole lot from Caleb other than the fact that he clearly has PTSD. He clearly was doing some sort of fighting after the end of season 3. And I think probably the most important thing we find out is that there's no robots in this world. And that makes sense after Rehoboam, because why the fuck would you want a robot around when it does something like that to you? But I do hope we get some more information about what this society constitutes as a robot, as artificial intelligence. Because like take something like Siri. Siri is artificial intelligence. The fact that today when I was talking about this bath mat that says get naked, all of a sudden I got an ad for it, like that is artificial intelligence in a way because it's programming for me. And so how far does that go? Because we know in Christina's world, we've got fancy glass phones and she's got this fancy computer, but we don't necessarily see that in Maeve and in Caleb's worlds in the same way that we do in Christina's. And I think that might be our big tell to let us know which is which over the next couple of episodes.
I was kind of surprised in all the discussion that came out since episode 1. People talked about Christina. People talked about the Man in Black. People talked about Maeve. There was like almost no discussion about this explosion scene. Like there's a scene where fucking Caleb straight up gets blowed up. It looks like they were taking out Solomon. Because if you remember, Solomon like gave them the key to go fuck Rehoboam shit up. But he's still out there, right? And it looks like they went back to take care of him. And I'm like, did Caleb survive that? Because he looked pretty fucked up. And it looked like he was out there kind of in the middle of nowhere with Maeve. Or is this like another misremembered event, like when he lost his battle buddy in season 3? I was surprised by how little discussion there is of this. And you got to know this is going to come back at some point in the season to reveal what the hell happened out there.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to do a lot more fleshing out of Caleb's character because right now, Aaron Paul, who I love, this is nothing against Aaron Paul. I think he very much, if you think Maeve's a sidekick, like he's just like an add-on. Like he's like the guy truly in the sidecar of the sidecar that gets left behind sometimes on, missions. And I'm hoping he gets a little bit more of a purpose.
Now, one scene you and I were very, very fond of was the Man in Black's scene at the Hoover Dam. Big D, you were excited about the Hoover Dam. You aren't here.
You got it, buddy.
You got it, though. In this scene, we see that the Man in Black is attempting to purchase this data center that is, inside the dam, essentially. It's hydroelectrically powered. It is, as they say, written in stone, right? This is like an impregnable, forever place to store data. And I'm thinking, is this meant to be the Forge 2.0? Like they thought maybe the Forge wasn't secure enough, but this is the Uber Forge. And we discover that the data the Man in Black is seeking, it's already there. And it belonged to someone who's no longer alive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it belonged to Dolores. It could have belonged to Charlotte. There's lots of people who are dead by season 4. And this could be guest data. This could be host data. And we know that in season 2, we saw that the Valley Beyond was a satellite target. But you got to wonder, is there a terrestrial counterpart for storage? Like, is that what he's trying to get at? But I can't think of any other massive data package that would require that much storage that would already be there other than either host data or guest data. And beyond the dam, the Man in Black is also buying property in scrub land, as they call it. So this is a man who already owns the parks. He's got access to all the Delos tech, as we see with the waves of hosts that he's sending out to do his dastardly deeds. And I'm wondering, what else could he be possibly building out there, or why would he want that land? We know that he wants to talk to a senator in California, which is not where Hoover Dam is, but seems to be some southwestern operation, massive in scale. And among other questions is, who is this guy, right? We saw William die in season 3, so chances are this is a host version of William. But just because a host Man in Black killed William and maybe assumed his role, assuming a straightforward timeline, under the control of Charloris, it doesn't mean that he's a robot, like in the sense that he just follows orders. This could be a fidelity tested William. Like we've seen Dolores put under different circumstances, kind of bifurcate into different versions of herself. It could be the same thing with the Man in Black, right? He's fidelity tested. He is the true Man in Black, but he's a host version. And if so, this would be a plan that the original Man in Black would carry out.
Yeah, and I think that we got a pretty clear picture that this is not a Dolores, red ball in his head.
Right.
Because of the fact that this feels so much like William. And what I loved about it is it felt like old school William, like really, truly bad guy William, who is a businessman and he is cold and he is heartless. And it reminded me of the scene in season 2 when we find out how his wife died and she committed suicide after seeing the clips of what William had done in his life. And this is him. He acts without really any remorse. He just does it. He doesn't think about how it's going to affect people because he's got to get shit done. And his energy, I thought it was the best part of the episode because it was so high. And I can't wait for him to come back in every single episode because, man, Ed Harris, he is on fire in that role.
And there was a interview with Ed Harris where he talked about this specifically, that when he thought he would lose that Man in Black character and be relegated in future seasons to just being kind of season 3 William, where he was more that businessman, that tycoon, and less the guy in the park. He was so excited to come back to this version of himself, this Man in Black version, where he could kind of do the role that he relishes the most. I do have one question about all of this, though. The fly thing. I need someone to explain the fly thing to me. Are the flies like nanobots that fly into your body and control it? Do they deliver something else, like a gas or some other nanobody that controls a person? Because my initial thought was that the flies were there as sort of an omen, but the guy got killed and then they replaced him with a host. But clearly, that guy is not a host. That dude is clearly in there he's not having a good time. And I know this sounds silly while watching a show like Westworld, but the science here had me so confused.
It had me confused too, and it reminded me both of an episode of Fringe, which I love. I think it's a really lost gem in the great, sci-fi series that are out there, and also randomly the Green Mile, because you know how Michael Clark Duncan
Yes.
throws up the flies into the guy's mouth and then he kills the other guy. That's what it reminded me of. But I have to say, there's a coldness to what he does here, because William is a host. Like, he could have gone and fucked all those dudes up and would have just walked away. But he wanted to prove the point that you're going to either give it to me today for this price, or you're going to give it to me tomorrow for nothing. And when he looks at that guy and he says, "You can rest now," and he slits his own throat, like, that was badass. I mean, it was really cool.
I was really hoping for a Universal Soldier running down the dam. You got a whole dam there. Jump. Come on. The flies all come flying out. It'd be great.
Well, I do think that obviously one thing we need to break down is Dolores's interludes here, because there are a lot of callbacks to other seasons of Westworld that we would just want to kind of walk through. So obviously, her waking up is one of the most famous parts of Westworld, is these hosts waking up and what they do when they wake up and how it changes as they become more sentient and more conscious. And there's this huge parallel here of Christina waking up just like Dolores did into a normal day. She's in bed. Her hair is laying across that pillow, and the sheets strangely perfect, because y'all should see my hair when I wake up in the morning. It does not look like that. And she has this routine. And instead of getting up and making breakfast for her dad and all of those types of things like in Westworld, here she gets up, she puts the bed up on the wall, which actually I thought was really freaking cool and a great space saver. She's looking in the mirror. She does these, normal things that feel like she does them every single day on a loop. And while she doesn't have the fly on her face like she does in previous seasons, she goes into the mirror and very clearly wipes something away. And there's nothing actually there, because I rewound and I watched this part over and over and over again. And she doesn't actually have anything on her face, but it's like she knows and feels that there's something there that's annoying on it. Like it's a tick almost that she has to wipe away. And I am convinced that this is like a tell to us. Maybe her less conscious self, did this right upon rising. And so now she's doing it because it's a part of this loop that she's just on. But they had to have done this intentionally, because they ensure that we see that she feels the movement of something, which is the only thing we're missing, is that waking moment from her with the fly.
And they ensure that we see a lot of things. The painting, they're like, how do we introduce the painting part? Let's put the easel right in her room, right in front of the window. Christina has a painting on an easel, much like Dolores did on the edge of Sweetwater when the boy told her that she's not real. Both of them express that desire to see beauty in the world among cynics in their circles. And one of our listeners, William Haynes, on Twitter also wrote in and said, did you notice that Christina's roommate asks her to choose the shoe color, white or black, the way that guests chose white or black hats in Westworld?
Right. And this is very heavy-handed because she chooses white. So it's like, check, she's going to be the good guy in this storyline, right? But I do like that they're carrying through with that. And I think it'll be interesting if this is a choice she has to make daily. Like if this is part of the loop that every day her roommate comes and asks her to choose, because maybe one day the white won't be what she chooses and she'll choose the black, and who knows what Christina will become.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because when she goes out on that blind date, she's wearing black shoes as she's going along. So could this be a loop where she's making different decisions, or a test each time? William Haynes also wrote in and said, hey, her first pitch at work for a story involves a girl taking care of her infirm father, which could be like Dolores and Peter, in the country. But then she changes that story to the city, Dolores being like the country mouse, Christina the city mouse. I mean, again, pretty heavy-handed, but I appreciate it. And like Ford, Christina also wants to write stories about people that are much more introspective, not those cheap thrills like you would get from like Sizemore and others. And her boss at Olympiad, that's like, people want sex and violence and tragedy. And one of our listeners, Black Woman Rising Daily on Twitter, also wrote in to point that out.
Yeah, and I think there's a really fun idea here because that I could just feel so much of Ford in the background as she's doing this telling of the story. It's almost like you could see Ford himself if he had this technology writing Westworld in this way with Arnold. And I love the juxtaposition of like her story needs an audience to consume it. Her boss says like, I'm going to find a writer who can give us what the people want, right? Just like Westworld itself, the TV show needs an audience to consume it. And Dolores feels like she's being watched just like we're watching the show, and we need to watch the show or it exists for no reason, which is like a triple layered, like hella meta thing, which I love. I also really appreciate that the stories that she's wanting to tell, I mean, obviously it's clear that they're not necessarily the stories others want to hear. Just like in the park, she's got the sweetest little backstory. She's this kind little painter, farmer's daughter, and just wants to get her daddy and take care of him. And it's just so precious and nice, but nobody cares about it. They just want to kill her or fuck her or maim her because she is this non-player character, because that's all that she exists for. And I love the idea that she's writing a story for a character that is the same thing that she is, and that parallel and almost like that agency that she has, that now she's writing the narrative, I think might be the key to how she wakes up from this. And then I also think like they're making very clear that her life is like pretty banal. It's pretty boring. And I think that it isn't just meant to like mimic ours, because we have our own routines like this. Like every morning I get up and I do the same 5 things. I have the same breakfast literally every morning. I eat egg whites, I cook up turkey sausage and a little bit of potato. I eat that every single morning. Like I am a Westworld host, right? And Dolores, she follows this pattern like for better or for worse, right? It is a routine she has. And when she does veer from it, when she puts on those black shoes per se, bad things happen, like this blind date. I don't think it's a coincidence that the moment she goes on the date and leaves her apartment, that like kind of all hell breaks loose for her, where these people are coming to her and trying to wake her up and asking her why she's quote unquote ruining their lives. She moves out of the safety of that track, and like things just get really dangerous very quick.
So I was scanning this episode for a pattern and couldn't find it. So I just want to say that even if this idea turns out to be nothing, I want to say I'm honored to co-host a podcast with a woman who thought of it, because wow, I'm going to be thinking about that all night.
Well, and I think the other piece here is that she has a really big quote in this scene. So she's on the blind date. She's just kind of going through her life, but she seems fairly accepting of her life until she's out, until she's veered off of this track, right? And she looks at her blind date, who suggests that she takes a tab for being depressed because he's an asshole. And he's like, women should smile. You must be depressed. Maybe that she doesn't want him holding her hand, right? And so Dolores says to him, what if I'm not the one that's broken? What if it's the world that needs fixing? And that line could have come out of any Dolores iteration that has come before. Seasons 1 and 2, Dolores, like this is the crux. Like this is like the campaign sign of her whole crusade that she goes on to fix what she sees as the quote unquote real world, to fix us as humans. And I think that this, with her being here and now asking this question yet again, that I think it's going to continue to come to a head this season.
And much like we saw in previous seasons as well, when a host has to make a decision, right? There are those decision trees we saw even like on the tablet with Maeve, right? There are these moments of freezing up, of really hard cognition, right? We also saw it during the fidelity test with Daddy Delos. Christina has one of those moments when she's on that date. She stares in the mirror for an inordinate amount of time, making a decision with the lipstick. It is a moment of questioning the nature of your reality.
It is. And think about our own way that we do that in the mirror. Like I often will look into the mirror for a really long time and not recognize myself because I wear the same color lipstick every day. And like, I feel really naked without my lipstick. And I think this is very intentional that she's changing the color of her lipstick here, right? She's changing something very marked about her appearance. And she's trying to make this decision about whether to do it or not. And whether or not if she changes it, if she puts on that lipstick, does the reflection match what she thinks thinks it should be when she looks back. And that's what we do. I look in the mirror and I put my lipstick on and I look like myself. And she's trying to figure out, I think, how do I make myself look like what I know I'm supposed to look like, but I clearly don't. And I can't figure out why, because I still look like me, but there's something that's off about me. And that is a very deep labyrinth of like identity crisis and about simulation, and reminds us a lot of the mazes that we saw in the first season. And I was so excited. Talking about fan service, I was like, fuck yeah, when we got to see a maze again, because this time we see it on the fire escape. It's like a little soil maze. And the great question about it, just like it was in the first season, that was so much fun to follow. Where does this maze end? And this one is for Dolores. It's not meant for the man in black, which I know he really meant it for the host, but a whole season we thought it was for the man in black. And so where will she find the key to answer it? What's going to be at its end? And for me, I'm wondering if this is the realization that she herself is the NPC she's writing daily, like truly meta, like she's writing her own storyline within the city that she's in, and maybe even writing her backstory. And that's why she feels so out of place, because she has no cornerstone. She has no backstory, and she's trying to write it. And maybe this will be a purgatory before some other Teddy that's going to come in and help guide her through. Perhaps it's a path to another door that she can't see. I don't know. I'm just here for it. I thought it was really exciting.
And something that could tie her guide and her cornerstone together is Teddy. And some people have guessed that he's the one who left the maze on the balcony. An expert climber, apparently, Teddy is. But he first appears in this episode defending Christina from Peter. Peter was the guy that was imploring her to stop writing his life into a disaster. Teddy shows up. He's looking good. He's got a suit on. Looks like Chelsea boots. Great haircut. I mean, I haven't seen the guy look this good in any of the seasons. And the next time we see him is looking up to her balcony, very West Side Story, as if he's watching over her, which gives you a sense of benevolence, like he's there as a protector. This could be a misdirect, though, because if you consider every other host from the park that we've seen in this episode, other than Maeve, who got out on her own, has been sent by the man in black. So Colonel Brigham, you know, when Maeve kills the guy with the mustache outside the cabin and she identifies him as Colonel Brigham and he has no idea what she's talking about, that's a guy from season 1, right? He's leading the hit squad at Maeve's cabin. Walter, you know, the Milk for Growing Boys, he's the guy that attacked Caleb and Frankie. So the man in black, presumably, is using these hosts from the park, the tech that he owns, as hit squads.
Or is it that line that Lisa Joy has told us to remember, which is reap what you sow? What better way to punish her than to put the man in black in the host body of someone that she trusts, right? And like, how fucked would that be if William himself is going to get her to find the location of the tower? Maybe Dolores has that, who knows? And that Teddy Flood is not Teddy Flood. And I have to tell you, I would so much rather Teddy Flood be a man in black than to be just like Teddy Flood again. I think that would be so much more interesting.
Yeah, and it leads you to wonder, like, is it reasonable to think that any other host other than Bernard, Charlores, and Maeve that's outside of Westworld is only there because the man in black wants him there? Or alternatively, if you really want to get tinfoily, maybe this is a fidelity test for Teddy. Maybe Teddy gets to be the star of the show for once. Maybe he's in a simulation. Christina isn't Dolores, and instead she is, as you've said, just an NPC in Teddy's game. Wouldn't that be a twist?
And he has to save her in order to get out of dying every episode.
Or maybe, unlike Hugh Grant in Notting Hill, he has to let her go.
She's just the host, standing in front of a boy asking for her agency.
So meta. All right, let's move on to some odds and ends. Just a couple other things we got to clean up before we sign out this episode. One other thing that we saw that was a parallel or a callback to previous seasons was that scene with Caleb teaching Frankie, his daughter, how to shoot. It calls back to the scene where Teddy teaches Dolores how to shoot. There's the mentor, who's a crack shot, the mentee, who's a female he's trying to empower. Clearly some lines connecting those things. The CGI. In the scene where Maeve set the cabin on fire, am I crazy or did that look like some WB shit?
It looked like some CBS Criminal Minds were going in to get the serial killer shit. It looked terrible.
Yeah, and I'm not the only one who noticed it, but I was surprised that they did it that way. I mean, you've only got an 8-episode season, so much like season 3, it's a shorter season, so you can kind of consolidate the money. And it doesn't look like they really skimped on the practical effects. So I don't know why they're doing that here, but we expect more from you, Westworld. Come on. Moving on to the book that Caleb was reading to his daughter, I alluded to it earlier in the episode, My Father's Dragon. If you're curious about it, it is a 1948 children's novel by Ruth Stiles Gannett, with illustrations by her stepmother, Ruth Chrisman Gannett. And that novel is about a young boy who runs away to Wild Island to rescue a baby dragon. Or maybe it's a dad who runs away from the man in black to keep his family safe.
Well, and there's this whole plot line in that book where there's a fisherman who shakes every time he talks. He has like clearly the signs of PTSD, who tells the protagonist that people have always tried to explore this island that they're trying to get to, the main character's trying to get to, that's called Wild Island, that people are always trying to go there, but they never return. And so he's trying to convince Elmer not to go. So this also could be an omen that they're going to get rid of Caleb this season.
And as Caleb is taken off on his adventure with Maeve, they talk about a senator in California that William wants to speak to. So I think that does confirm some semblance of a democratic government still exists in North America. Did you catch the dude's conversation when Christina first hits the street in this episode? They're talking about how it's going to like blow your mind, and it seems to be referencing a park. And it got me to thinking one of two things. Either there's a Delos Park that's now open to the poor, unwashed masses. It's not just for people who have $40,000 a day to attend. Or I wonder if these guys are like the guests who visited Westworld and openly commented on it, right? The guys who broke kayfabe, who were just walking around the park like, oh, this is William. I've seen him 10 times before, and he'll take you some wild shit.
Or maybe it's just another marker to remind her of where she comes from. That's how I took it, because I am just convinced this is not a real world. Like, I'm convinced she's in something very similar to what Maeve was stuck in the previous season. I mean, not World War II world, Nazi world, but she's in something. And, she stops and she clearly listens and she picks up on what they're saying. And I'm curious to see how much more of that side dialogue, those little moments that we can pick up on.
And before we get any emails about Peter being named Peter, yeah, that whacked out dude who tells Dolores she's ruining his life, he's named Peter, just like Dolores' father, Peter Abernathy in Westworld. And normally I would just dismiss that as like, yeah, lots of dudes are named Peter. It's a biblical name. But this is Westworld.
Yeah,
it's got to mean something. And a final note, getting to the music of Westworld, we've always appreciated since season 1, the music that's been used, particularly for me with Radiohead. In this episode, we got the refrain from Lana Del Rey's Video Games, which just continues that tradition of Westworld picking just the right song and barely masking it orchestrally. And I hate when they do this because I start feeling things. And I'm like, why am I even feeling things right now? Nothing happened.
Yeah, this show uses music absolutely beautifully. And I have to tell you, even just the opening, I forgot how excited I get when that Westworld theme starts with, the guy at the piano. Although every time I hear it, I want Robert Ford back because it just reminds me of Anthony Hopkins and his Twitter piano interludes. And bring back Anthony Hopkins.
I'm sure he's just sitting around waiting for them to call him.
Westworld 5.
This is an odd episode because I think we asked just as many questions as we answered. So please write in and let us know what you thought. You can email us at hosts@shatontv.com. You can go to shatpod.com/TV and use our SpeakPipe feature. Just click right on it and you can record us a voice message as well. We'd love to hear from you. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld. Be sure to follow us on social media and share it with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcasts. The website is shatpod.com/TV. And again, if you do get an email in for our Telegraph, which will be coming out on Friday, please try to get it in at the absolute latest by Wednesday morning, so that we have time to read through them, pick the ones we want, and hopefully get it on this week's episode. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube, be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a 5-star review that helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Ash and Big D, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us Friday for the Westworld Telegraph.